Hey everybody, welcome to episode 7 of the true story of how I became the All-American boy in Vietnam. Well, so I told you in the last episode about the infamous night flight to Quy Nhon, and boy, I tell you, that was scary. And well, anyhow, when we got to Quy Nhon, things quieted down until the next morning. The next morning, it turned out we were flying um, directly on the rest of the way up to Tokyo FOB near Fubai. Now, Tokyo FOB, that was a Special Forces Forward Operations Base, FOB, and that's where we parked the helicopters and had a barbed wire perimeter, and we had the Special Forces personnel. I guess there were 50 or 60 of us, and mechanics and what all. And there were about 200 of the Special Forces Delta teams. And the Delta teams were made up of an American officer, an American sergeant, an Arvn, Army of the Republic of Vietnam, an Arvn officer, an Arvn sergeant, and other teams of what they call the Delta teams. And, well, anyhow, they were our long-range reconnaissance people. And we flew them into the A Shau Valley, and they did their job, and we brought them out of the A Shau Valley, and they brought us information about what was in there. But they didn't really know what was in there. And that lack of accurate data ended up being devastating against us when we actually launched that operation with the 101st and with the 1st Cav and the Marines. It was a disaster. Well, anyhow, I'm getting ahead of myself. I wanted to tell you this amazing story. Now, I was pretty ingrained in the operation as a reliable supply sergeant. If somebody needed something, they'd come to me and say, "Hey, can we get this?" And I'd say, "Sure," and we would go and get it, steal it someplace. So, anyhow, um, okay, so here's how it rolled out. Is the platoon sergeant pulled all of us supply guys together and said, our intelligence has told us that since we have been blocking the Ho Chi Minh Trail, that the North Vietnamese Army is going to do their resupply right from the beach at the South China Sea. And as it happened, the beach was just 5 miles or so down the hill from where we were there at Tokyo FOB. And they told us that the most direct route up into the A Shau Valley was directly from the ocean directly over our position and directly into our position and then up into the A Shau Valley. It was going to be bad. Well, my response to all of that was, live hard, die young. So, anyhow, when it cooled off a little bit, after dinner, I climbed up on the roof of the bunker, and I had my Martin with me, and I was just playing and playing and playing. And I figured, what the hell, if we're going to be overrun by the NBA, I'm going to at least have this one opportunity to play my guitar. One last time to play my guitar. And I'm playing, and I'm playing, and I'm playing. And smoking a lot of pot up there on the bunker. And this soft-spoken, tiger stripe wearing Arvn officer came up to the bunker where I'm playing, and he didn't have any insignia on. I didn't have any idea what his rank or job was. I just thought he was a Vietnamese guy. He says, "Hey, you know any Everly Brothers?" Well, I know Everly Brothers. I knew dozens of Everly Brothers songs. They were one of my favorite artists from the 50s and early 60s. And so I started playing, and he started singing the harmony parts. And when I want you in the night. Well, anyhow, we're singing. And it turns out that this man is the biggest fan of the Everly Brothers in the world. He loved the Everly Brothers, and he knew virtually every song. And not only did he know every song, but he could play it on the guitar. And he told me that he was the only other guy beside me who had a Vietnam guitar with him. And so he went down to his company area, and he brought his guitar back. And I'm telling you, it was a piece of shit. It had steel strings on it that just to chew your fingers to shreds. The high action. The guitar was made out of plywood, it looked like. Well, to make a long story short, he told me that his name was Lieutenant Tran. They call him Tran. And I think that he was part of the Wynn family. And he told me that his brothers and his uncles and his father and his grandparents had all died in war, fighting the Japanese, fighting the French, the anti-colonial wars, and then fighting the communists. And he was the last in his line. He was the last. I think his last name was Wynn. His first name was Tran. And so anyhow, he climbed up on the bunker with me, and he didn't smoke any pot, but he didn't seem to mind if I smoked pot. And we started playing Everly Brothers songs. And we played and played and played Everly Brothers songs. And wake up, little Susie, wake up, doom, 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 doom. Just song after song. And love the Everly Brothers. Well, it wasn't long before he was salivating all over that Martin guitar. And so I said, what the hell, we're going to die. We're being overrun tonight. So, Lieutenant Tran, you want to play this Martin? And he said, well, of course. So he started playing the Martin, and I started developing bloody fingers on his wretched-sounding Vietnamese guitar. And I taught him how he could tune his guitar down and get the action to play a little bit easier. And well, anyhow, we played and we played and he played. And I said, well, we've got to crash here. We've got to get some sleep. It's getting late. And so I made him promise that the very next night that he would come back and we'd play more Everly Brothers. And he could play the Martin. And, great feeling, man. That is great. So I went into the bunker with my shovel. It was an entrenching tool, actually, is what it was. And I dug down into the floor of the bunker. And I dug and I dug and I dug until I had a grave for my Martin. I wrapped my Martin in a towel and put it down in this hole in the ground and covered it up with dirt. And I put a layer of sandbags on top of that, so that guitar was going to be pretty well protected unless it got a direct hit, and then all bets are off. But it was in the bunker, so I figured, what the hell, we'll be all right. Well, I got a brilliant idea. About 4 a.m. Couldn't sleep. And so I went to the maintenance officer, and I said, Lieutenant Dan, I got an idea. I said, we really, really must have at least 2 tail rotor hubs and some avionics gear, or we're going to have some gunships that are going to be out of action. So let's fly over to the supply depot at Red Beach and see if we can't get these parts, because, there's no sense in having helicopters out of service because you don't have parts. That would become my theme, and that's how I made my reputation in the 281st, and had been promoted from every time I had a major score, stole a major batch of parts, I would get promoted. And I was already a PFC on my way to Spec 4. So anyhow, Lieutenant Dan, the supply lieutenant, he bit. And so at early dawn, first light, the next morning, we still hadn't been overrun by the NBA. I thought it was just a matter of time. And so Lieutenant Dan and I, with no aircraft commander, with no crew chief, with nobody but him and me, we hopped in the helicopter, fired it up, and off we went to Red Beach, which was a big supply depot for the Marines and the Air Force and the Army. It's a joint venture kind of thing. So in we fly. As was my wont, I would do a supply reconnoiter to see where all the good stuff was. And oh my golly, the Marine Corps had a whole Connex filled with tail rotor hubs. And they didn't have a guard on them or anything. I don't think they understood what a gold mine that represented, that Connex. Connex, by the way, is a steel box similar to the shipping containers they put on the giant boats these days. But it was 12 feet long, 8 feet wide, and 8 feet high. So it carried a lot of tail rotor hubs. So how am I going to get... Oh, man. We are parked all the way at the other end of the flight line from where this box of Connex was, and a box of tail rotor hubs. So I walked up the hill, and it was a substantial hill. And I walked up the street, up the hill, until I found the Air Force motor pool. And I said, I've got to load a helicopter down on the flight line, and I don't have any way to move the equipment. Can I borrow your forklift? And they could tell I was Special Forces because I didn't have any dog tags or ID. I didn't have a U.S. Army uniform. I was wearing what they call tiger stripes. And tiger stripes were special camouflaged costumes that didn't say U.S. anywhere on them. And it turns out that the 5th Special Forces and support personnel, we all had a bounty on our head if we could be captured by the Viet Cong or the NBA. I mean, me, a puny little PFC, had a $5,000 bounty on my head. I was a target. But I also had a certain cachet because I was clearly part of the Special Forces team. And the thing about the Special Forces team is that if you cross the Special Forces guy in Vietnam, chances are you're going to wind up dead. Because they didn't teach those guys how to fight. Nobody in Special Forces knew how to fight. What they knew how to do was kill motherfuckers like you. So don't get in the way. Sorry about that. Well, anyhow, special the Air Force said, "Oh, have at it, man." You know. And so I went out there to the motor pool, and they had the biggest forklift I've ever seen. I mean, it was a forklift that was designed to move those connexes around. It was as big as a Caterpillar D9, except it was wheeled. So I rolled it right down there to the Marine Corps supply area. Put the forks right under that box, lifted it up, and down the flight line we went. A big forklift, a box of tail rotor hubs, and me headed toward that 281st Assault Helicopter Company helicopter. And I will mention to you also that, as far as I recall, it didn't have any serial numbers or any identification painted on it anywhere. It was just blank. And so Lieutenant Dan's down there smoking cigarettes and taking a nap. And I pull up with the Connex, and I say to Lieutenant Dan, I said, you might want to, start this thing up because we may need to leave in a minute. And sure enough, way down at the other end of the flight line, I see a Marine MP, and he's got the rotating beacon on his Jeep. And I think, oh man, if they catch us, this is going to be bad. And so I'm tossing tail rotor hubs two at a time into the Huey, and Lieutenant Dan is cranking it up, and the main rotor blades are starting to spin, and the tail rotor hubs are starting to spin. And God, I must have got 30 tail rotor hubs, two at a time. Womp, 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 womp. Okay, so I think the Marine figured out that I'd gone up the flight line with that Connex, and I see the Jeep headed our way. And I said, okay, let's go. And so we got on that helicopter and had no clearance, had no nothing. We just took off and started heading back toward Tokyo FOB. And I swear, oh my God, I swear that the Marines sent a Huey after us. And they were on the radio saying, state your name and your purpose and come back to Red Beach. We need to talk. And Lieutenant Dan just pretended like his radio wasn't working. I mean, I could hear it. And he and I could talk on the intercom. But we were not responding to that Marine. And I saw the crew chief of the Marine helicopter, and he's pulling on the lever on his M60 to get it ready to shoot. Well, what? At us? Yeah. So I took my M60 and I pulled the thing, and I made a point of pointing it directly at the crew chief. I mean, he could look right down the barrel of that thing. And I'm thinking to myself, go ahead, let loose with that smoke wagon and see what happens. And the message must have teleported, because it wasn't long after that, and the old Marine helicopter just returned to base. And, what the hell, all we had was like 30 out of several hundred tail rotor hubs. What the hell were tail rotor hubs doing in that quantity at Red Beach? Well, somebody was doing some sort of nonsense because they were not supposed to be there, and might as well put them to good use instead of letting them sit in a box. And so, bingo, Spec 4, Andrew Wilson, Spec 4, the All-American boy, scores again. So, we're in radio conversation with Tokyo FOB, and turns out that the NVA, they must have been afraid of our gunships or something, because they didn't overrun Tokyo FOB like we thought they might. And so Lieutenant Dan and I were a couple of cowards who had run away so we could fight another day. We'd come back in the evening and, have a glorious dinner of powdered eggs and bacon and powdered milk, and it was disgusting. Where are the freaking LRP rations? Well, long range reconnaissance patrol. Those were the dehydrated rations that were great. The macaroni and ham and spaghetti. That stuff was good. I mean, relatively speaking. So anyhow, we're having a terrible meal, and it's starting to get dark. And so I go up and I'm sitting on the top of the bunker and playing the guitar. And I dug up the Martin, and no Lieutenant Tran. And so I put the guitar back in the case and wandered on down the hill a little bit to where the Mountain Yard mercenaries had their quarters. And I'm looking for an Anglo face, and sure enough, there's a Special Forces sergeant. He must have been an E7 or an E8. And I said, "Excuse me, Sergeant." I said, I'm looking for my friend Lieutenant Tran." He said, "Who?" And I said, "Well, I think his last name is Nguyen. He's a Vietnamese guy with the Arvns." Well, it was a tense moment, and the sergeant slowly looked around at me, and he looked me in the eye, and he says, "Lieutenant Tran didn't make it." I said, "What do you mean he didn't make it?" He said, "We were flying in the airshow, and he took it in the neck." I said, "What? What are you telling me?" And Lieutenant Tran, the last surviving member of his family, died in the service of his corrupt little nation. It was horrifying, and I just felt so empty. Those Delta Team guys, they were out doing dangerous work. They get killed all the time. But he never entered my consciousness on that level. He was Lieutenant Tran, who played Everly Brothers songs and sang beautifully. And he was gone. Dead. And so I'm sitting up on top of that bunker by myself, smoking copious clouds and clouds of marijuana. And I'm looking down toward the seacoast. I mean, the Tokyo FOB was on a pretty high hill. And so anyhow, I'm looking off to the east, and bada boom, bada bing, bada bing, the red tracers going from south to north, and then there's green tracers going from north to south. And those freaking NVA and the 5th, 7th, and 9th Marines were having a firefight down there. And it was like going to the drive-in for me. And I'm just watching. Tracers going this way, tracers going that way, tracers going this way, tracers going that way. And, you could hear the sound of that firefight wafting on the breeze up to Tokyo FOB. And as I recall, that was the closest experience that I have had of dealing with heartbreak. I didn't even know this guy. Just played guitar with him one night, and yet we were brothers in the Everly Brothers. I was heartbroken, and let's end the stream now. We'll talk more in episode 8. If you enjoy this story, I hope that you'll bring others to watch it, and like the pages, subscribe to this channel if you like, and I'll just brag a little bit. I understand that the average watch time on a YouTube video is about 1.5 minutes, if you're lucky, and the average watch time on these story episodes has been 13 to 16 minutes. So I want to thank you all for watching, and thank you all for subscribing and supporting this channel. And I hope to see you again real soon as the story starts to take a twist. And anyhow, God bless, and thanks for being here. Oh, and don't forget to breathe. Peace out, brothers. Bye-bye.